Good afternoon. How are we doing? You okay? Friday? I saw some brilliant memes going around saying, look, everyone's excited for it being Friday like they are every week, but this week it's Friday the 13th in 2020, which has certainly been an unlucky year. So I saw people quite rightly concerned about what today might bring, but otherwise pretty happy. Might have a few hours off this weekend. That's how I'm getting excited about things. But how are you guys? How are you doing? Can you hear me? All the usual questions from me about paranoia over tech. It looks like mics are working, and hopefully I can hear you. I say hear you, I can see your comments come in if they do, and so please let me know if you can hear all right. A couple of things I want to talk to you about today is I want to talk about virtual conferences because I've been involved in some, but also because it's the day of Virtual Physio UK, which is the CSP's. CSP has a flagship conference each year at a big conference centre, usually Birmingham. I think it sometimes varies, but circumstances mean that they've done a virtual version of it, and it's quite an interesting difference to the sort of webinar-based conferences that we've run and that others have done. And so I've got my ticket and intrigued, and it's using vPUK software, which is something that we looked at and considered for Therapy Live. So it was just fascinating for us to shop around, but also for us to interact as much as we can. And so I'm going to be dipping in and out especially today, but hopefully a bit tomorrow as well. And so, yeah, I want to give you a little bit of a take on that and also start reflect with you guys about virtual conferencing as well, because I think that's interesting for us to reflect and wonder as to what the purposes are for certain things, the purposes of events, etc. And so first question that I want to throw to you that ideally you pop in the comments is, have you attended any virtual conferences? If so, which, and also have you enjoyed them? What features of in-person conferences are you missing? What features of virtual conference so in favor of that you can't see yourself necessarily harking back to old times, be that courses, conferences, workshops, whatever it might be? I want to know about some of the features, because I think that matters really. What are the goals and the key things that you maybe have enjoyed but also missed? What are the things and outcomes that you're looking for that you have been able to achieve by virtual simulation of a task, and what otherwise is something that's been difficult to achieve? Because if we get that together, then we'll try and understand as to what the different formats are. One of the things that's exciting about this Virtual Physio UK thing is that it's trying to emulate something different to your webinar-based platforms, and therefore the different goals and typical styles and formats of the conferences that it's trying to emulate, we need to try and use technology to best try and achieve those same goals. Otherwise you'd be moving the goalposts. And so, that's one of the things I want to reflect on with you today. So please do let me know as to whether or not what you've been engaging with in recent months, or whether or not even before this whole pandemic lark, there's plenty of people that have enjoyed a webinar or two, and potentially even a virtual conference that we've heard from, and how standards have been raised often because of the circumstances. So that's the first thing, and I will go there in a second. The other thing that we're going to come to eventually is, I don't know if you've heard about the fact that the NICE guidelines for ME and chronic fatigue syndrome have been updated, and the main reason for that is because there's been some activist pressure from patient advocacy groups over the notion that exercise is a evidence-based modality that would be worthy of a NICE guideline, and that there's been pushback by a set of patient advocates for that to be revised, and it has been. They've challenged it sufficiently for NICE to then make adjustments. And so there's been a massive, let's say, mixed review of whether that was the right thing to do, with professionals and patients on both sides of an argument, and it's incredibly contentious. So I wondered if you've seen any of that, what your opinions are of it, and we're going to go over it in a bit more detail in case you haven't, as well as then looking out and speaking to some colleagues that might come and join me on the show in coming weeks to try and spell that out a little bit, because it's something that really, especially in an MSK community and stuff, you may well not see patients as the primary reason for them seeing you. They might well have these conditions or family members, etc., or it be something that could be another contributing factor to their story. But it's something that I think more importantly in this instance, and why I want to discuss it on the show, is I think it's an incredible example for us to try and navigate where clinical experience and patient narrative experience meets evidence, meets scientific advocacy, meets guidelines, meets politics, meets identity, meets governance. Basically, like all the things that we're often talking about come to a head in a particularly potent example. And so it's not the nitty-gritty of it, although the detail naturally matters, and one of the reasons why I want to get experts on this to think about it. But I think it's a good example of where we need to try and understand the consequences as the precedent that might get set, and whether or not it's the right move or not is also something that I want to hear from both you and others about. So if I'm interested in whether or not you've heard about that, and also whether or not you feel what the mechanisms are for patient advocacy groups to change things like NICE guidance, and whether or not that's something that you are concerned about, or whether or not you see that as being a real sort of rights-based victory, as some people have. So yeah, many thanks to those of you that comment both. Again, some people tune in live, some people after the fact on video, some people listen to the podcast afterwards, and thanks for doing so. Some great feedback from this week's shows, by the way. Really enjoyed it, including yesterday. A bit ranty. Andy Saunders said it were a bit Jonathan Pye yesterday, which tickled me. I didn't realise quite I was on that much of a soapbox, but he's probably right. I was a little bit. And I've had some lovely feedback. A lot of it private, as you can imagine, which is one of the issues that we have, is that the things that I talked about yesterday with regards to NHS pay review and the reaction to it, it's sort of really fraught and emotive. And so people are a bit concerned at being on the wrong side of a mob there, and being seen as being contentious or stoking fires for the sake of it. And obviously I said yesterday I didn't want to be that guy. I'm not doing it to be a contrarian, but a lot of the feedback coming in is really fascinating. Is that, just to give you a clue on that, is that I've had feedback in fairly equal measures from therapists who have never been busier in the last 6 months, that's last 9 months, sorry. And then I've had therapists get in touch and said, I'm afraid I'm one of the people that have been truly twiddling my thumbs through no fault of my own. And here's the story of trying to, why I'm concerned for the system, why I'm concerned for the profession, why I'm concerned about the media narrative, as well as the pushback to the media narrative not being mature. And then there's been some people disagreeing with my take and saying that I'm sort of hyper rationalizing quite an emotive issue, and that I'm not close enough to it to empathize and stuff. So it's been fascinating and great that people are getting in touch with me on all that different spread of feedback, which is fascinating. So many thanks to those that have been getting in touch, and please do, because it could well be that topic particularly needs to roll over. I definitely would want to hear more on that. Now, back to virtual conferencing then. Let me show you this from earlier, right? So Virtual Physio UK is on it's Verbila, which is Verbila Campus is it's like a Sims. Have you ever remember Sims in the computers? Like you create little avatars and you drive around a world, and it's like an island that is made as a conference center. So it's got lots of typical conferencey features, halls and space and stuff, and because it's virtual, it can be bloody massive, and it is. And you walk around it, and you basically, it's interesting because you sort of turn your mic on and off. You go into certain private areas, and this is part of the poster walk. And if you think about, like, this is my mate Rob Tyre, with my other friend Kate Purcell. I know Ian Laughran less, but know of him. And anyway, we just happened to be there at the same time, talking and grilling Rob Tyre about his poster. And as you can imagine, you think about an in-person poster presentation, it's certainly less grand than this, but that's the thing you can do within, when you're dealing with code. But anyway, so Tyre's presenting his poster here, and we're grilling him about it, and it was really interesting to talk to him about it. And it's something that I'm looking on and thinking, is the whole thing just a bit too gimmicky and unnecessary, or is it something that is the best way for them to replicate the types of conferences that they typically do? Oh, I feel naked without this framing. There we go. And in all honesty, the way that I've only had a few hours on it this morning, is that when you think about that, their conferences are typically primary networking events to get people together and to discuss less so clinical issues, more so leadership, governance, policy strategy. Think about CSP as an organization, with it, with its two arms really, mainly being the professional body, and its trade union means that you've got lots of sort of representation is a primary goal. Union issues, leadership, and so the networking aspects and workshops and things like that. It means that they really were probably wanting to as closely replicate a typical conference of theirs as they could. And to be fair, when I've shopped around for software, this is one of only 2 or 3 that could even attempt to do that. Now, I'm yet to hear from people as to whether or not, it's not typically how I go about things at conferences. I bloody hate the schmoozing and stuff. I'm quite a sociable person, but generally speaking, I find it a bit cringe. It's like sort of quite over-organized networking fun where you're trying to sort of leverage reputation or sort of that sort of schmoozing style is a bit. I'm not a fan of it, really. It's not how I like to go about things at conferences. Really, I'm there for the content more than anything. And I'd sooner do the networking and socializing in a different context, but that's just me. However, these events are typically that way out, and I think that maybe there's some learning for me to do to potentially use those events more wisely as I go into different roles. But this is one of the things that I've come to realize in the last few hours, but also when I've really reflected on what it's trying to emulate. I think it's actually spot on. I think they've done the right thing. I think they're using the right software. Now, one of the things that's challenging is that then I don't think it's a great platform. It's got so many other features and frills that I don't think it's the best platform for delivering education and content and creating engagement around that content. And so it's not something that I think as a platform for delivering education is optimized. However, that's because I don't think the primary function of the CSP's Physio UK conferences is the delivery of education. And when it is delivering education, I find that one of the things that's happened, I think they've sold maybe 1,200 tickets. And you think about the membership, I've just heard Alex McKenzie, who's chair of council, she's just announced that there's 60,000 members. Is that you're therefore dealing with a very small amount of the membership. I mean, you don't even know that the 1,300 tickets being sold are to physiotherapists and members. So let's just imagine that maybe that's down to 1,000. So 1,000 of 60,000 have attended, and therefore you think about how many of those are in each of the disciplines, say respiratory, neuro, pediatrics, orthopedics, that sort of thing. And so then when I notice there's some sessions that I'm going to be attending where it's like, people like Nina Schmid, who I'm a massive fan of, and her team as well, they're doing the focus symposium about neuropathy. It's a ridiculous pit. And I'm like, I'm going to be tuning into that, of course. But I think about how many are going to be like me doing that. And you might be down to a few hundred. If you're going to be down to a few hundred, it's likely. You think about if that is a key scientific session that needs to be presented and spread, then it's a shame in a way that that's not going to necessarily reach out widely, and that does concern me a little bit. But then again, I don't think these are the sorts of moments, these little moments of delivering sort of science, especially under typical conference format in which they're sort of playing out their data and stuff like that. It's something that is not. I just don't think it is the primary of what the CSP are doing with these conferences, both in person and then simulating it virtually. And therefore, it's something that's not fair for it to be held to account against other platforms that can be more interactive as a learning experience. But anyway, let's have a little butchers as to what some of the comments coming in. Thank you, David Poulter. Really appreciate your comments as ever, mate. He says he's tuning in from France. Look, that's cool. Advantages of virtual conferences: no travel, no hotel costs, can sit and cycle whilst listening. I never even thought of that. Yeah, I bet we've had people on spin bikes. Downside: no social interaction or post-conference discussion with peers. Yeah, definitely. And that's one of the things I'm interested in seeing what happens here. Is to me and Rob Tyre, who could have picked up the phone like good mates, instead we sat in a little private room thing, just having a back and forth, how's the family, on this little Sims game that is the CSP's virtual campus. And if people are doing that after the fact, because they've actually taken the time, blocked their diaries off, and they're going to have those moments with catching up with people at a time where they've had not, are they able to simulate some of the social interaction in a more authentic way, with their mics on, etc., chatting rather than typing? I don't know, it'd be interesting. But I do agree with you there, Dave. And I will. Oh, here we go. Right. Caris Williams. I think it's the Caris Williams off of Physio Matters First Steps. Hi, Caris. Thanks for tuning in. I've found online conferences quite lonely. Appreciate the low cost as it's not paying for travel, though. definitely a fair point there, Caris. I've found this whole bloody year bloody lonely. It's one of the reasons I'm preaching into the ether on a daily basis, I think, is because I'm crying out for maybe attention, some would argue, but certainly contact and communication and discussion. And I find online conferences not dissimilar there, especially those that are reaching the scales that we've been doing with Therapy Live, is that sometimes it feels less intimate. And also, yeah, you can't literally walk around with your buddies and take, well, we're going to have an hour off and go to the pub and stuff like that. So I think that's certainly an issue. I think one of the things we need to try and bridge the gap on with virtual conferences is that trying to create a sense of community around each session, as well as, and so all voices here are being heard and all voices mattering, but then also trying to make sure that there's an obvious sort of cause and effect between the feedback that's given and then the action between not just sessions, but between sort of events, which is what we tried to do. We tested the water in June, of course, at short notice, and then we've tried to learn as hard as we could for Therapy Live Sport last week, and that adapting and learning and listening to the feedback as closely as we can. I think that that's something that the minute that the delegates don't feel that they've seen their core feedback enacted, I think it's where it really falls apart. And I think we need to make sure we recognize that creating a culture and a community in which people feel like they're being recognized and respected, and their points and questions don't get completely lost in the ether, and they have direct access after the fact to the speakers, and to be able to know where to find them and know where to find their materials and stuff, I think is key. I'm not saying anyone's getting it perfectly right yet, but I think that that's one of the things that we've all got to bear in mind, because I think what we've made the mistake of doing, especially like 6 months ago, is that you kind of think, right, what is the event that we would do face to face? How do we emulate that virtually, rather than thinking, right, what are the virtual tools at our disposal? How can we make this something that is appropriately unique and leans into its strengths? And I think that's one of the things that we've got wrong. I think hats off as well to the CSP for going with the Verbila because of the timing of this event, right? So imagine how many bloody Zoom webinars and events of different sizes, and even with Therapy Live being sort of very content and education based, is that this is something different. It's something novel, and they have gone for something that is as close to, they're doing their best to simulate what they consider the core offering of their style of conference, which is to not go to the masses, not go for tens of thousands of delegates. Instead, they want it to be focused around academics and people presenting sort of posters, and also people that want to sort of network and get massive benefit from networking with other research organizations or colleagues that they could collaborate on with research or leadership and governance and management and that sort of stuff. That's their target audience. I've actually picked I think they've picked the right platform and style for that. But it does mean that they suffer a little bit in terms of the delivery of the content, the actual education and the scientific content. I think it's still, I mean, it's cool. Those of you that got a ticket, go and have a look, because it is cool. As I've just, if you haven't seen already, I was just showing you, like, this is a Rob presenting his poster. And when you're in a big auditorium and stuff, you can zoom in. But it's just that, the features and the ways in which you can interact are not as refined as it could have been, because instead it's doing so much other stuff. But again, I do think that they've picked the right thing there. Gemma has said, hi Gemma. Oh, Tim has said, some will be students too. I think he's maybe referring to me saying about how many of the 1,300 tickets that they've sold would be members, etc., and physio. And yeah, absolutely, some will be students. And also, yeah, it's hard to know, but yeah. You've just heard. It's interesting, isn't it? That 60,000. I always think saying 56,000 was always what I thought were chartered physios in the country, but yeah, now apparently 60,000. So yeah, we're looking at a small percentage that are there. But again, out of choice, and also again, what is it trying to target? Gemma Oliver says, lack of social interaction is massive on a number of platforms at the moment. It's limiting organic networking, ideas in progression that can occur in this natural way. Bring back face-to-face contact and hugging. Absolutely, Jem, of course. Bring back the hugs is definitely well worth probably a hashtag campaign, I would say. Gemma said, we can try and create this on Physio Matters Plus. Can we create a community environment, encourage more of this organic networking and professional development? Obviously, one of the key goals really of our membership really on Physio Matters Plus, which is where you get all the Therapy Live content, early access to Physio Matters materials, is you're trying to find something that's between public access, open, lost in the noise, Twitter, for example, Twitter. But then also not so niche that it's a private Facebook group with a few people that it becomes an echo chamber really quickly. Like, can you find this sense of community in which you've got collaboration and sharing, but without taking the edge off anything that's vaguely interesting in terms of opinion or content or compromise or debate, which is what we've seen. We need that friction to create some fires under certain ideas. And so, you know, I don't know. We've got our ideas. We're going to try it, but that's something that I think is a well worthwhile task to try and do. And Gemma's also, of course, involved in what we're doing and saying any ideas welcome for how we can create more community spirit. Definitely, please do get in touch if you've got ideas there, or if you have any feedback on what we've been doing, as well as what the industry at large is doing. And it's great that we've got different styles of event that are happening, including today's Physio UK. Anyone else? Anyone taking the time to come on to chewing it over? Out of the, I mean, unfortunately, competing now with sort of the founders lecture that Alex McKenzie, chair of council, was just delivering, as well as I think Karen Middleton and Sally Lamb are going to be talking a bit later. So I'll be jumping back on there in a little while. But if has anyone else on there, anyone else enjoying it, anyone else been driving their little avatar around? One of the things that's funny is I've dressed so bland here, you see, that I've actually got flip-flops on. You can't see them, but people have been commenting on my flip-flops. I was just like, look, I needed to have something quirky. Also, I want to make note that my avatar is far slimmer than me. It's sort of false advertising. I wanted to try and make my avatar really fat, but I can't. But yeah, there's sort of I'm able to masquerade as someone vaguely in shape in this virtual land, which is fun. Now, I definitely want to get on to what I'd mentioned about the learning from this ME chronic fatigue syndrome thing. So I don't want to mischaracterize what's happened, but let's just give you a bit of a framing, and we'll talk about it in future shows. But I think it's really relevant for us to at least reflect on for a second. One is that the NICE guidance for ME and chronic fatigue syndrome, I think it's sort of emerged, is that it's appropriately defined as the complex phenomena that is still somewhat misunderstood, but a biopsychosocial one, in which of many of the things that people can do to treat it, then it's considered that graded functional exercise and sort of a CBT meets CFT approach in many ways, as MSK professionals would recognize it, has been advocated for based on some research. And I think it's called the PACE trial, which has been a very contentious one, but it was sort of a large multi-center study that's been then, some people consider it debunked, some people consider it to have been challenged, some people say about it not being able to be replicated. But basically, for patients with chronic fatigue syndrome, come ME, that have then, amongst other things, they've then been suggested to go through some graded exercise programs. And there's been a subset of patients that then consider that to be, and I don't want to mischaracterize it. So again, we're going to talk about this again, I imagine, but the core thing I've noticed is that they're frustrated on two counts. One, they are pushing back quite hard about it being something that they perceive to be an entirely physical, rather than having any psychological or mental health connotations to it, and are frustrated at it being considered such. And so they feel that it is a physical and physiological disease. And so therefore they're frustrated over the notion that it would be miscategorized. The second thing is that they suggest that actually exercises and graded exercise being advocated for is deleterious, and that actually it should be something that that as soon as you get people doing that, then that's only going to add to fatigue. It's not going to actually train resilience. They just push back on the notion that it's actually a good solution. So they're frustrated on analysis, and they're frustrated on the proposed solution. And so then these advocates and activists have then challenged the NICE guidance on a few different counts. Some of which, coming from the fact that they feel that the science that's based on is contentious, but then also they feel that it doesn't map onto their lived experience in an accurate fashion, and that they feel it's an injustice. And so they've then been pushing back on it for years. I think, unfortunately, I've seen that it's, from what I gather, it's been quite ugly in many ways, with emotion on all sides, really, where the patient advocates have felt dismissed by medicalization of the circumstances. But then also there's been a lot of contention over the treatment of the authors of studies, and that people that have come, what the patients feel have come to the wrong conclusions, mean that they've been got at, and they've tried to discredit them as both people and as scientists and as thinkers in such a way that there's been a lot of playing the man and not the ball, as the adage goes. And so I've been appropriately distant from it enough to not really know where the truth in the matter lies, but it certainly sounds like a contentious one. But if you think about what's happened, whereby NICE have then changed the guidance on it, then it's that's fairly new as a precedent. They change guidance and they update and refine things, but this is something that does seem to be, and from what they've described, it's something that is at least nominally in response to activist pressure, which I'm not saying is a bad thing, but I'm saying is new. Or at least I think it's new. It's new in how it touches what might be something I need to act on clinically. But I also think that it sort of tells us a lot about this state of affairs at the moment, whereby, as we've spoken about on this show, you've got things where we need to try and balance subjective narrative-based understanding of things from lived experience point of view with broad data and best practice evidence. And sometimes those things can feel like they come into conflict, and we need to be grown up about how we create an appropriate nexus between those things. And if you overweight one or the other, then you're certainly going to not get closer to the truth. And let's just give an example in this instance. Let's imagine, as many thoughtful people have suggested, is that actually there is a real sensible place for graded functional rehabilitation for patients like this. Then if we move too far away from that and suggest that that's actually been debunked and dismissed, then we're not going to be delivering quality care to patients. However, if we think that line becomes too empirical and starts to suggest that that is a one size that fits all, then the patients that feel that that is not for them and have got evidence of that being detrimental to them for whatever reason, or that it contributes to a misdiagnosis, then that's something that certainly I think we end up mistreating for different reasons. Is that we end up missing the individual because we're considering them part of a wider whole, and not recognizing them and how they might be different to the cohorts in which have been studied, right? So it's sort of, I hope you can see, for especially those of you that have tuned into this show before, we often talk about that challenge, and for me it shouldn't be one or the other. It's about how can we integrate those and how can we discuss it sensibly to stop it being sort of very fraught, because I've seen accusations of bullying across all sides of it, including accused of people that I've only ever considered to be thoughtful and empathetic, and so all of a sudden they're being considered a bully because they disagree with a certain piece of science or a point of view. And I think that's where it gets ugly and it's disappointing. So we're going to talk about not just this case but examples like it, because if we don't see a route beyond that, then we're screwed. Kind of maps onto yesterday a little bit as well, is if we can't find a way to speak to each other, then we are totally screwed. So let me just all sorts of things popping up on my screen. Sorry, here for a second. Maybe later on my virus checks and all that sort of gubbins. So here we go. Right, thanks, Gemma. She's posted the MECFS NICE guidance draft for consultation that's come out. So it's a consultation draft, so that'll be one of the reasons why it's contentious. She posted a link, so you have a look at that if you're unclear of what I'm talking about. So I really appreciate you posting that, Gem. And especially if it's a consultation, then consult on it. get your views heard. And also, we'll be helping you do that by, I'm going to approach a couple of people that have been involved in the discussion, especially on a professional level, to get them on the show and give their take on the matter, because I might have missed something and I hope I've not misrepresented it. But what do you think? Let me know. Let me know if you're close to this. Let me know if you feel something I've missed, but particularly let me know as to whether you see this as being something that goes beyond ME and chronic fatigue. Is this a precedent that is a good thing or a bad thing? Is this patient voice in motion and in action? It's a slippery slope whereby we're kowtowing good science is being overrun by it coming to the wrong conclusions according to people that are disappointed, and that the counter to it isn't credible. I don't know. Let me know. So anyway, massive amounts of reflections today on all things virtual conferences, as well as this new NICE thing. But also, it's been a funny week where we've talked about all things from policy to governance with Neil Langridge, through to complexities in and around politics and whether or not the NHS should have a public sector pay rise, how we respond to Daily Mail articles on the internet. We've had a fair journey this week, so thanks for coming along with me. This show's now, I didn't notice yesterday, but it was the 50th episode, so it seems to be going down well. We're growing, and it's a few thousand people tuning in each show now over the course of time, not necessarily live, but after the fact on video, but also on the podcast. And so it does seem to be going well. So please do let me know if you've got any refinements that you'd like to see for the show. We call it a landmark yesterday at 50 episodes, and so make sure you're letting me know as to what you think is working well. You want more guests? Do you want less guests? Do you want less of me, more guest hosts? I'm all ears for all of it. So do let me know as you want what you want from this show and what you think is of value and of use to the industry. Because as you know, everything that I try to touch across Physio Matters, Therapy Live, MSKR, Choose Health, even clinically, it's all to do with trying to raise standards, not just in MSK, but across healthcare. And of course, then when we touch current affairs, trying to have sensible, rational conversations that then are appropriate and aspire us to get closer to the truth. And that's what we're all about. So thanks a lot as ever for joining us, and hope you have a lovely day and a lovely weekend. I'll see you on Monday.